Thank you, Eddie, for the introduction. I have the immense privilege today of facilitating the second annual End Social Isolation and Loneliness Action Forum 2021. And today's panel discussion will be taking action globally. So before I start, my name is Michelle Lim. I am the co-director of the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection and the chairperson and scientific chair of Ending Loneliness Together in Australia. So today I'm speaking from Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, which is on Aboriginal land, specifically on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians. And today I'm joined by the founders of these national organizations who have dedicated their work to combating loneliness in their home country. Specifically, we have Canada, Japan, and Germany, who are all members of the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection. So please welcome Pete Bombaci from Canada, Jannis Kuhlencord from Germany, and Koki Ozora from Japan. Welcome to all of you, and I'm really pleased to have you today on this panel discussion. So before we start, I think it would be really lovely for you to provide the audience with a two-minute overview of your home organization. So where it is, who's in it, perhaps some of the 2 or 3 major goals that you have for 2021. Perhaps let's start with Germany.
Everyone, my name is Jannis Kuhlencord, and the small flag in the background probably already gave it away. I'm representing Germany in this conversation, or to be more specifically, I'm representing 2 organizations today. The Togetherness Hub and the Initiative Gemeinsamkeit. For clarification, Gemeinsamkeit is a German word, which actually includes both the word for togetherness and loneliness. Let me start off by expressing how excited I am to be part of this international conversation happening today. So what are these organizations about? The Togetherness Hub, on one hand, represents an international community platform which provides the digital infrastructure to collaborate with organizations and individuals who are either tackling loneliness or working towards more social connectedness in society. We showcase events and research from around the world. We actually have already, since we went live in March this year, already have people from 26 countries connecting with each other via the hub. And we also use it as a working space for the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection. And to a certain extent, it already offers today what organizations like the WHO or the European Commission have been emphasizing in their latest reports. We need to tackle loneliness as a community of change makers and not as individuals. And on the other hand, the Initiative Gemeinsamkeit is a fairly new attempt to build a coordinated and collaborative approach in Germany to lift the topic of chronic loneliness on the agenda of decision makers and politicians. We're therefore closely working with ministries, with interest groups, scientists, foundations, and many more to create a movement towards more human and community-centric systems. And to be honest, currently it's all about identifying all relevant stakeholders and bringing them to the table. But we're also busy planning an event series and a report. So quite a lot of interesting things happening here in Germany right at the moment.
Thank you, Jannis. It's really lovely to hear about the energy since the launch of the Togetherness Hub and up to now with the amount of work that you guys have been doing. Can I welcome Pete into this conversation?
Beautiful. Thank you, Michelle. Great to be here and great to be a part of this global conversation as part of the GILC. Exciting to have Canada at the table. So I founded the GenWell project back in 2016. It's a consumer-facing, grassroots campaign whose mission is to make the world a happier and healthier place by educating people about the benefits of proactive social connection to their health, their happiness, their longevity, and maybe not for them, but for the people around them as well. We empower Canadians by giving them tips, tools, and ideas And we also catalyze a couple times a year when we articulate a couple weekends or activate around a couple weekends when we want to give people an excuse and permission to actually reach out and get connected. We are really focused on raising the consumer and the general population consciousness about the importance of human connection to their health, happiness, and longevity. And secondly, getting them to be more intentional about their social connections. Most of us on this call will know about the research that's there. I will say that we are working hard to get policy and working hard to get government officials on board. But we believe in the campaign that I led out of Canada, the focus is really for us to get the consumer level awareness up about how important social connection is. So we are working hard each and every day. We provide information on our social platforms and on our website to help people better understand the issue, and then provide the solutions and the reasons that they can activate to get connected. Over the course of the next couple of years, our goal is to continue to drive that awareness throughout the Canadian population, seeking partners both on a corporate level, but also finding the organizations that are also working to drive that level of awareness. And our real short-term goal is about getting 1 million Canadians to actually activate consciously around the idea of getting people connected in our country so that we can make the world a happier and healthier place, at least from our level, and then working as part of the Togetherness Hub to really drive this awareness globally, because certainly getting policy is an important part, getting people on board is an important part, but at some point we need to get the people to actually take action. So that's the role we're playing over in Canada, and it's truly just an honor to be a part of this incredible group as part of GILC. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. And I can hear that actually already the similarities in terms of, really trying to bring this issue to policymakers that could also make the difference, not just with the community, which is incredibly important, but all the way up to all the systemic kind of factors that sometimes are not within our control, but policymakers and government really have the power to kind of make some real change.
For sure.
And can I please welcome our lucky last Koki from Japan.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Koki Ozora, and I am our university student and founder of Anata no Ibasho, or Ibasho.org. And Ibasho means place for you in Japanese. And we are 24-hour text messaging hotline for prevention suicide and loneliness, and those who are depressed or lonely, or anyone who'd like a listening ear, they can send us messages. And we used web-based chat format, which makes it much easier, especially for young people, to reach out for help. And we have more than 600 volunteer counselors around the world on call. And messages often begin with a phrase like, I want to die, or I'm lonely and I don't have anyone to talk to. And people feel worse late at night, and when their needs are greatest, they have nowhere to turn to. So we are kind of groundbreaking, a real first to provide a 24/7 availability, especially when people tend to feel more suicidal and lonely. And our goals for 2021, well, we have 3 main goals for this year. And one is to disseminate information about Japan's first ever 24/7, 365 days a year chat helpline, so that people are aware that they have somewhere to turn to. And secondly, to improve the quality of our chat service by establishing our headquarters, recruiting specialists alongside trained volunteer counselors. And lastly, we have goal to influence national policy making to tackling loneliness is that the heart of the Japanese political agenda. And I think we're doing very well on these 3 goals.
Thank you, Koki. That's amazing. And as many of us would know, Japan has recently appointed a minister to address loneliness as well in early 2021. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So let's start this conversation, and especially in the context of COVID, loneliness and social isolation are both issues that are highlighted since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020. How is loneliness kind of experience in your community of interests, and how has it actually impacted on your work? Anybody can start, and feel free to just have a conversation about it and chip in and out. Jannis?
So I think when it comes to Germany, what surprises me the most after more than 1.5 years being confronted with COVID, and I think having this underlying pattern that everyone agrees that social disconnection is something that highly impacts them. Many can't pinpoint exactly how it impacts them. They might not be aware of the research underlying loneliness or chronic loneliness, but they definitely can say they feel disconnected, or they kind of seek other kind of access to other kind of social contact or anything. And when we then turn towards the governmental response, and Germany, we're now facing an election year, so quite a lot of those decisions are being postponed after the election, but that doesn't kind of change, of course, the urgency of the matter. And so when we take a look at what is happening after 1.5 years in Germany, we still have chronic loneliness being portrayed as something that mostly affects elderly people, which is contrary to what we know from science, that it's something that we actually should address cross-generational. And therefore also the funding opportunities we have available for community organizations, for social projects to address those issues here in Germany are not set up broad enough. And so we constantly kind of see this cry for help coming from the community, coming out of civil society, but there are just not enough structures in place yet. And so this is exactly what we are trying to address, that we say, okay, we first need to build the ecosystem which even can do the agenda setting and can do the lobbying, that funding opportunities and kind of the awareness level for decision makers reaches a point where we can really have, we really can make a difference.
Jannis, I think you actually very nicely kind of point out actually a very common issue that happens not just in this area of loneliness and social isolation, but actually there's a gap between what we know with the scientific data and the trends that we see. You know, trends in this case, loneliness not being really, you know, kind of being high for other vulnerable groups, not just some, you know, older adults. But then there's actually this gap that we haven't quite bridged in both our policies and our industry practice. And that's something that many organizations, you know, like in Japan and Canada, have also been trying to kind of bridge that gap. Can I bring Pete and Koki into this conversation as well?
Yeah, I'll just build off of what Jannis said. Certainly, we see the same thing. When we launched in 2016, everybody thought we were launching a seniors movement. And my response was, yeah, certainly it's about seniors, but unfortunately, it's about awakening the rest of society up on the time that they need to make to go see their seniors. So it's a societal issue. And I think during the pandemic, what I will say that youth is something that has also been in Canada, certainly brought to the forefront as kids spent a year at home working from home or doing classes remotely. I think we've all started to recognize the broader issue. It's still, you know, as I often say in Canada, is, you know, we were educated on physical activity. We've been educated on eating well, you know, from childhood. That's a part of the education system we have here. In the last 5 to 10 years, we've been speaking specifically about mental health. And oftentimes we don't think of our social health as a part of that conversation. We think about mindfulness, and we think about gratitude, journaling, and those are all really important things for our mental health. But the important thing about social health is that it takes some. I think that's what we're all waking up to through the global pandemic, as Jannis pointed out. When you don't have somebody around you, everybody's had a taste of what it might feel like to be lonely. And I think this is, you know, I hate to think of this as being a catalyst for good, the silver lining coming out of the global pandemic. but maybe this is exactly what GILC and what all of us around the world needed to raise the consciousness of how devastating the impact of chronic loneliness can be to people. And so we continue to put that message out each and every day, because we believe that now is the opportunity to get people while they're conscious and to make this a bigger priority in their daily lives. So yeah, it's been a long journey, and hopefully on the other side of this, people will take up the cause, and both from the front lines all the way up to the policy and the political leaders, that we'll see the support that I think we're all looking to see.
Okay.
Well, in Japan, many people experience loneliness silently, often with sense of shame, and then they blame themselves for what they're going through. And feeling lonely carries such stigma. I mean, a very, very strong stigma in the Japanese society that they find it impossible to admit it to people around them or seek help. And this is why totally anonymous internet web-based helpline is vital to many people, and there is a huge demand. And we provide 24/7, 365 days a year cover. So those who are desperate not to be noticed by anyone in their family feel able to contact us. So that's what's happening during the pandemic in Japan.
Okay, just out of curiosity and perhaps for some of our viewers here today, do you think that COVID has increased the shame or of loneliness, or has it helped made feeling lonely less shameful for the Japanese people?
Well, it's like a traditional thing, to handle with their own problem without help of others. It's seen as a virtue, and in Japan. So I mean, it's not changing, compared to the before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic. I think people who have someone who they can turn to or speak to, like, well, people who have the friends or people who have family members who lives near them. I think they could access to them before the pandemic, but now in the pandemic, it is very, very difficult for them to contact them. They lost someone who they can trust very much during the pandemic, and the people who didn't have the people who they can trust very much before the pandemic, they also, of course, cannot access to the people who they can trust very much, or who they can talk anything that they want when they need to. So it's very tough time for Japan. And in fact, the number of the suicide by children is the worst. It's the highest number since statistics started in 90s and 1970s. So it's very tough time for us.
That's a fantastic point, actually, perhaps, and it's quite perhaps different in some other countries, because as you mentioned, I think there's a layer of culture here that actually may indeed compound loneliness because there's increased social isolation from normal supports. Whereas what Pete was saying actually before was the opposite, which is that in Canada, a lot of people may not have known that the pain of loneliness, and all of a sudden they do know the pain of loneliness because of this increased social isolation. And perhaps definitely in Australia there's more empathy around, oh, this is how it feels like to be to be lonely or not to have many people. But you speak of a very important cultural difference that it's not generally thought of. So Pete, is that the experience as well? And Jannis, is the experience in your country around that?
What I was going to say just about Canada is that I think actually part of this is the fact that most people didn't understand loneliness and couldn't articulate it. So to your point, whereas to your point, there's cultural roots in Japan about loneliness. In Canada, I think we've gone through it, we've experienced it, but we wouldn't have articulated it as loneliness, and we wouldn't have sought the solutions that I think are coming to the forefront today. So I think that's what's changing. You know, now to your question to Koki as well, as I think in Canada, unlike going through a divorce or job loss or some other personal challenge which might result in people feeling lonely, the pandemic has allowed us all to have these conversations more openly, because the person living beside you, your former colleague, your kids, everybody's going through this right now. And I think it's been really powerful that everybody has the, and I'll use the word confidence, to actually say, yeah, I've struggled through this pandemic. And I think that's what's creating, you know, a greater awareness and consciousness that'll, again, allow us to carry this message forward and say, hey, now we need to do something, because this was happening long before the global pandemic.
Well, I think we've been able to observe the same in Germany. So instead of pinpointing it towards loneliness, I think the question is kind of the perspective: is it considered a cause for certain problems, or is it considered a symptom? And I think in Germany, along the way, it's usually rather been considered a symptom. So, for example, if you're in the middle of a bereavement process and you lost someone close to you, then the people might have retreated from others, and loneliness has been kind of considered a side effect from this bereavement process, someone being taken from you. But I think from what we can draw from science is that quite often loneliness can also be the trigger to all sorts of negative consequences. So health implications, mental health issues. So the correlation between kind of someone experiencing loneliness and creating this downward spiral, the likelihood of that person then for example, experiencing depression. And so I think now slowly but steadily the conversation is turning towards maybe we systematically need to address loneliness in our society to kind of find solutions for some other issues we are tackling, not in a coordinated way. But if we tackle loneliness, all those problems might at least have quite might decelerate.
Yeah, and Jannis, I think you've kind of made a really good point, and again, very consistent with research, is that loneliness is actually an antecedent to many other kind of more problems down the line. But more generally, we tend to tackle it as a symptom of something or more serious issue, when in fact there's a lot of research now that says that loneliness itself is independent, determinant of health, but targeting loneliness as a preventative approach could actually yield to better outcomes. But we tend to kind of go with the sticky end of things and try to deal with them when someone's really feeling very, very bad. There are 2 points of intervention, of course. One is that you do the preventative approach, and the other, as a psychologist, I would know very well, is that we tend to deal with it when someone is unwell. Both have merits in terms of actually being able, for example, to target loneliness at the severe end, is that you are able to actually facilitate recovery. But on the preventative end, actually, we will prevent future mental health and physical health problems. So we need to kind of think about where that point of intervention is, and also what's the context of the person. So really great point.
Maybe to jump right in there, because you said the point of intervention. And I think if we can also take one thing away from also this global conversation we are having as being part of the global initiative on loneliness and connection, I think for me, one thing became quite obvious, that there is not this one point of intervention, but rather this kind of complexity, that loneliness is not this one-way street, that you have this one solution and suddenly for all those individuals experiencing kind of this subjective feeling of chronic loneliness, it's suddenly being solved. But this fascination going alongside it, that there are urban planners and architects who are thinking about how urban spaces can be designed so that people are being brought together instead of kind of living kind of next to each other, but without kind of interacting. how we can change public transportation, how we approach unemployment and kind of trainings happening in that space. So there are so many different kind of factors we can influence and we should influence, but I think currently we still need to even raise the awareness and kind of educate decision makers how much impact they actually can have in that space, and that it's not just about, for example, the most prominent solution we have in Germany is to have apartment complexes which are housing equally elderly people and young people. And this is a little bit more or less the kind of simple solution of the German government to solve loneliness. And we say this is not enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you mentioned, like loneliness is quite a complex issue. It's very subjective. Just because one thing works for you doesn't mean it'll work for me. So we do need to have a variety of interventions and points of interventions, whether it's coming from the person, the community, health services, or policy changes to the way we live, work, and play. Those things are all really important.
Yeah, and I think from the GenWell project's perspective, we see it on a spectrum, which is, there's crisis management, as you touched on, Michelle. We certainly need to have those systems in place, and that could come through the lens of loneliness, where somebody might get called Koki and certainly be in a crisis. Could happen through our medical system, and that's, and could happen through the lens of mental health, or it could be heart attack, or all the other issues that can arise from chronic loneliness. We've got social prescribing, which I'll move upstream a little bit, where this is about helping people as soon as they may not identify as loneliness, but we're doing the check-in and we're trying to help them recognize where isolation and loneliness may be contributing to their visit to the doctor, which I think is wonderful, and then connecting them to the resources that will see them get back up on their feet and be more positive. And then I look at the role that we're trying to play at GenWell, which is really the prevention focus, which is, hey, if there's a percentage of the population that is at the doctor or in crisis, there's a large percentage of the population who we don't want to go there. And I know you touched on it earlier, Michelle. If we can educate the 60–70% of the population that today isn't feeling any sense of that, or maybe even more importantly, recognizing the role that they can play in making those other people, helping those other people. We, one of the things I often refer to is we have to stop waiting until people are sick before we try to help them. And so if we can all as a society step up and recognize the role, not only we can play in our own health by staying socially connected, but actually the role that we can play in the people that are around us through a simple conversation, it may be the greatest gift we can give each other, especially as we come out of the global pandemic.
Thanks, Pete. Very valuable insight here. Let's go on with the global initiative, because I think that we've kind of talked about a lot of what we've done in our internal countries, from the preventative approach to kind of the more acute kind of intervention. Just kind of going back to why we came together in the first place, what do you think the potential impact of the global initiative on loneliness and connection is, with the collaboration of these 8 countries?
Well, I think to share the information or data is very, very important, and it related to the last discussions. But in Japan, the prevention is not very enough. It's not enough, because people, including the government, a bit they're very good at making policy for intervention, but as a result of those activities, we've got more than 130,000 messages in the past 18 months, just in 18 months. And, it's too much for the intervention organizations like us. We cannot handle all, chats or all helps, because the government or many organizations, companies asking the people who are lonely or who have suicidal thoughts, going to the hotlines like us, or we have enough intervention, but we don't have any perspective the prevention. So, and when we gonna frame a policy and prevention loneliness or social isolation, we need to find the trigger, life event triggers or the social triggers, but we don't have any research yet. We don't have any data inside Japan about loneliness or social isolation. We still don't know how many people are feeling lonely in Japan. So I think it is very important to share the knowledge or skills or data across the globe. You know, well, we have the Minister for Loneliness and Social Isolations, but still so many people, you know, didn't recognize the loneliness as the social issue. And many people believe that loneliness and social isolation is a personal issue. It's seen as a personal issue, but it's not. So we would like to share the, you know, knowledge and information skills. I think it is very important.
Yeah, that's really well said, Koki, and not just with you know, our countries here participating today, but other countries have done, you know, huge awareness campaigns like the UK. You know, that exchange of information about how we can actually do these increase of community awareness before we get to that kind of crisis point, so that it can alleviate the burden on a lot of the organizations who are trying to carry the weight of loneliness and social isolation when it actually gets to that crisis point.
And to build up on what Koki just said, I couldn't agree more on this kind of knowledge transfer aspect being the potential of the global initiative on loneliness and connection, specifically keeping kind of redundancy and efficiency in mind. So I think the GILC can really help to avoid redundancy globally and to increase efficiency of programs, of governments, of different organizations trying to tackle loneliness, because it's kind of this multi-layered approach. I really like this kind of saying, think global, act local. So I think we all agree that the most promising loneliness prevention and intervention schemes are kind of embedded in the local environment. So kind of public transport, neighborhood development, access to shared spaces, and so on and so on. But so I think from what Koki also just pointed out, there are hundreds of thousands of brilliant projects and ideas happening on the local level, which are never kind of coming out of this local level. They're never reaching this international conversation or kind of even the national conversation. And so I think the potential I see behind the global initiative is that we can really bring those ideas to the forefront and make them transparent, and so kind of upload ideas from the local level to the national level, from the national level to the international level, then evaluate those ideas and then download them back to the kind of national and local perspective to maximize impact, but also not to kind of waste resources, and kind of similar projects being developed all across the globe with kind of same conceptualization costs, which are basically targeting the same mechanisms without even sharing knowledge in the process. And so this is what I'm really excited about. And I think this is what we already can see happening from the conversations we're having and kind of the collaborations coming out of it.
And I don't think there's anything else to build on in regards to shared learning. And we just did our Canadian Social Connection Survey, which I'll send over to Koki. But I think actually the final point I'll say is this GILC has given me hope. And it's given me hope because I've connected with people, and Jannis was the first person that I connected through the hub on, and to find other people that are as passionate and doing incredible work around the world. And, you know, we just got to meet Koki in the last few weeks, and to see the passion that he brings to his work in Japan, and to know that we do the same thing in every other space around the world. It gives me hope that together we will find the way to make the world a happier and healthier place, one face-to-face conversation at a time, because we need it more than ever coming out of the global pandemic. So yeah, I think there's so much good, and it's just great to be a part of this.
It's always your spirit paid is just amazing. Like, I think you're part of this conversation. Always love it. one thing came to my mind when you also pointed out kind of all those different stakeholders now moving together in this conversation. And of course, we all also then kind of a couple of months ago, like encountering kind of for the first time in conversations, what we're seeing currently happening globally. So the WHO is currently funding efforts to evaluate kind of loneliness interventions. The European Commission does something similar. National governments are funding similar projects. And so I think what we can observe quite often happening there is that those different programs are to a certain extent, at least at the current moment in time, detached from each other. So that you could even say silos are currently existing. And I think the wonderful thing in having representatives from different nations also being then embedded in different organizations, being in touch with, for example, the European Commission, OECD, WHO, that we can observe those silos and actively tackle them and invite people to a broader conversation and really kind of build bridges between those kind of fragmented approaches. And so I think it's really unique what we're currently building up here.
Thank you, Jannis, Pete, and Koki for your valuable comments. Do you have any last comments before we tie this wonderful and really interesting panel discussion?
Well, I think the loneliness is widespread globally, and stigma is a significant additional problem as well. And I think concerted political action is vital to ensure this is dealt with systemically at government and societal level, I guess. And as Peter said, until I joined the conference or meeting them, I felt like lonely. We are only organization who tackling loneliness in Japan, and who are doing such activities in Japan. But we have so many friends or membership who fighting against loneliness or social isolation. So it is very much for me. And I think the Japanese government, also the UK governments, they also didn't have any partnership across the globe. So I think for the organization or the central government level, it is very important to share and the knowledge or skills or data or maybe the friendship across the globe to tackling loneliness and social isolation.
Thank you, Koki. We're making friends through this agenda.
Yeah, and I'll just build on Koki's comments. It's so great to be a part of this team, and I think as we've talked about in some of our GILC meetings, is this is how we're going to ramp up the credibility of this issue and the movement that we're trying to create is by coming together and demonstrating that there are leaders in every country around this world that are doing something. From grassroots up to, policy, we need to demonstrate that if we're not doing it in our country, but everybody else is, let's all wake up and recognize that this isn't a Canadian issue, a German issue, a British issue, a Japanese issue, or an Aussie issue. This is an everybody issue, and we'll tackle it much better by taking those best practices and sharing the research and the learning everywhere we go. So I think this is literally the start of amazing things to come. And as I say, it's just so great to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Pete, for addressing it as a wake-up call, because I couldn't agree more with this element of waking up. It seems like even though 1.5 years being into the pandemic, kind of decision makers, politicians, they are still waking up, being confronted with kind of the research, which is not around since COVID. It's around for 2 decades at least, kind of when you dive into kind of the early pieces. And I believe as a global community, as nations, and also on individual level, we kind of need to ask ourselves, which narratives do we choose to follow? How big of a problem do we consider loneliness to be, or social disconnection to be? because, I mean, to be honest, all around the world, we're facing polarization and kind of a divide in societies, which seems almost unprecedented. There's scientific proof that social exclusion increases the likelihood of people believing in conspiracies, and that loneliness increases distrust in our fellow humans. So I think keeping that in mind, while COVID, I think we're not coming out of it just yet. I think it's kind of far from over. I agree with this element of it being a wake-up call, and that it really showcased how dependent we are as a human species on social connectedness. And so just emphasizing what Koki, what you also, Pete, and you, Michelle, you're equally underlying, let's make social connectedness and our social health a major political objective. Let's make it a priority. Let's not sideline it, but let's really make it a core element to consider for urban planning, for healthcare, for workplace programs, education. There is so much we can do, so much policymakers, decision makers can do. We just need to do it. And I think within GILC, there are quite some people who also help those people on the way to kind of get better decisions out there.
Thank you, Jannis. And I think it's very clear today, just with this panel discussion, that, you know, all three of you, you know, have really brought your immense knowledge and experience, and actually, most importantly, your passion into this issue. And we do need to work together to really make a difference. And as Pete was saying, yes, we are working, you know, within our individual countries, but when we do work together, we are stronger and we can make a bigger difference. And I really look forward to moving this agenda within GILC, and also to collaboratively work with other organizations globally as well. So thank you again for this valuable discussion and very inspiring. And I hopefully, you know, the call to action will be listened to and will be action as well in the near future. So back to you, Eddie.